What would you do if the man who shattered your heart, the man who called you an anchor, holding him back, decided to get married on the one day of the year that was sacred to you both? For Aurora Monroe, that day was October 12th, her wedding anniversary. The invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war on her memory. But Declan Peterson made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed his ex-wife was still the broken woman he'd left behind. He had no idea she was about to RSVP in a way that would not only crash his wedding, but shatter his entire carefully constructed new world. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a catalogue for Italian leather goods and a bill from the architectural firm. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that whispers of expense and occasion. Aurora Monroe ran a manicured finger over the embossed lettering, her heart giving a painful, familiar lurch. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Miller request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Sophie Miller to Mr. Declan Peterson. And there at the bottom, the date that felt like a deliberate poisoned dart, Saturday the 12th of October. Their anniversary. 5 years they had been married. 10 years they had been together. October 12th wasn't just a date. It was a cornerstone of her life, a day she had once believed was etched into the stars. Even after the divorce, a messy, brutal affair that had flayed her soul raw, the date remained sacrosanct. She'd spend it quietly, sometimes with her sister, sometimes alone, a day of somber reflection on the woman she used to be. Now, Declan was taking that too. He wasn't just moving on. He was bulldozing the ruins of their shared history to build his new life on top of them. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, sounding foreign in the minimalist quiet of her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Of course he was. It was so quintessentially Declan, grandiose, selfish, and utterly thoughtless. The divorce had been 2 years ago. The words he'd used still echoed in her mind during her weaker moments. You're not ambitious enough, Aurora. You're comfortable. You're an anchor, and I'm a ship meant for the open sea. He had made her feel small, as if her dreams of building her interior design firm brick by painstaking brick were quaint hobbies compared to his vague, bombastic ambitions in the world of finance. He'd painted her as the reason his career hadn't skyrocketed, the quiet domestic weight holding back his ascent. The irony was so thick she could choke on it. In the 2 years since he'd cut the anchor, her firm, Monroe Interiors, had exploded. She'd landed a feature in Architectural Digest, secured contracts with 2 boutique hotel chains, and was now in negotiations to design a series of luxury lofts in Dubai. She wasn't just successful. She was thriving in a way she never could have when a part of her energy was constantly being diverted to soothe his fragile ego. She dropped the invitation on the marble island, the sharp clack echoing in the room. Her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Maxwell. He was standing on a tarmac in Geneva, a breathtaking backdrop of the Swiss Alps behind him, grinning into the camera. The text read, "Closed the deal. The prototype is officially ours. Celebrating with fondue. Wish you were here. Home tomorrow. J." A genuine smile touched Aurora's lips, the first one since opening the mail. Maxwell Lancaster, the man who had walked into her life 6 months ago like a calm, steady sunrise after a long, violent storm. He was a tech billionaire, a fact he rarely mentioned. And that was the least interesting thing about him. He was kind, fiercely intelligent, and looked at her not as an anchor, but as the sea itself, vast, powerful, and beautiful. He celebrated her successes with more enthusiasm than she did listening for hours as she detailed fabric swatches and lighting schematics. With him, she felt seen, not just observed. She picked up the invitation again, the anger returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hollow ache of a victim. It was a cold, clarifying fire. Declan didn't know who she was anymore. He still saw her as the woman who cried for a week after he left, the woman who had to sell their shared brownstone because she couldn't bear the memories. He was flaunting his new life, his new bride, Sophie Miller, a socialite whose father owned half of Wall Street. Aurora noted with a cynical pang on their day, assuming she would shrink wounded into the shadows. He was assuming she was still anchored in their past. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the length of her apartment, the glittering panorama of New York City, a silent witness to her turmoil. The city had been their playground. They'd had their first date at a small jazz club in the village. He'd proposed on the Bow Bridge in Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon, just like this one. His ghost was everywhere. For 2 years, she had worked to exorcise him. She'd poured her pain, her anger, her resilience into her work, and it had paid off. She had built a fortress around her heart with steel and glass and success. But this invitation was a battering ram threatening to breach the walls. Going was out of the question. It was masochistic. It was handing Declan the victory, showing up alone, a spectre at his feast. It would confirm every condescending, pitying glance from his family and friends who had always thought he was too good for her. Not going felt like defeat. It felt like hiding. It felt like letting him have the final say on what October 12th meant. It would be his wedding day forever. The thought was unbearable. She found herself in her home office, scrolling through the social media profile of Sophie Miller. It was a curated gallery of perfection. Skiing in Aspen, yachting in Monaco, charity galas at the Met. Sophie was blonde, beautiful, and radiated the effortless confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. In one photo, Declan stood beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. He wore a tailored suit, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He looked like he'd won. Aurora's finger hovered over a picture of the engaged couple, a professionally shot photo with Sophie's enormous diamond ring prominently displayed. The caption penned by Sophie read, "I can't wait to marry my king and build our empire together. Declan Peterson, you are my everything." His empire, Aurora thought, with a humorless smile. Declan had always talked about his empire, a vague and glorious future that was always just around the corner, always impeded by some external factor, the market, his boss, his supposedly unsupportive wife. The fire within her burned hotter. It wasn't about the man anymore. She felt nothing for Declan but a dull, clinical revulsion. It was about the narrative. He had written the story of their ending, casting her as the villain, the dead weight. He was now writing a new story, a triumphant sequel on the very day that defined their shared history. She would not allow it. She would not be a footnote in the story of Declan Peterson. When Maxwell's car pulled up to her building the next evening, she was waiting. He stepped out, a tall, commanding presence, in a simple grey sweater and jeans that probably cost more than her first car. He enveloped her in a hug, his scent a comforting mix of expensive cologne and the clean, crisp air of the Alps still clinging to his coat. "You seem tense," he said, his perceptive blue eyes searching hers. "Everything okay?" Inside, she handed him the invitation. He read it, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. He looked from the cardstock to the date, then back to her face. He saw the storm in her eyes. "The 12th," he said, his voice low, "of all the days in the year." "It's a power move," Aurora said, her voice tight. "It's a final twist of the knife to make sure I know he won." "And what do you want to do about it?" Maxwell asked. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her to ignore it or that Declan wasn't worth her energy. He knew she was past that. This was something different. "I was going to throw it away. I was going to book a spa day, fly to Paris, anything to pretend it isn't happening," she admitted. "But it feels like letting him win. It feels like I'm still letting him dictate my life, even in his absence." She looked at Maxwell, at his calm, unwavering face. "He thinks I'm still the person he left. He thinks I'm alone, struggling, a comfortable little designer. He has no idea who I am now." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face. It was the smile he got when he was about to solve a complex coding problem or outmaneuver a corporate rival. "So," he said, his eyes glinting with a shared spark of rebellion, "why don't we show him the idea once spoken aloud took on a life of its own? It shifted from a wild, vengeful fantasy into a tangible, strategic plan." Maxwell's question, "Why don't we show him?" wasn't just rhetorical. It was an offer, a key to a door Aurora hadn't even realized was there. "What do you mean, show him?" she asked, a tremor of excitement running through her. "Crash his wedding, Maxwell. That's insane. It's dramatic and petty." "Is it?" he countered, leaning against the kitchen island, the picture of calm audacity. "Or is it simply correcting a narrative? He's telling a story about you to his new family, to his friends, to himself. A story where you were the weak link. You have the opportunity to present a revised edition." He picked up the invitation again. "Blackwood Manor. Quaint, old money aesthetic. An hour north of the city. We could drive." He paused, a theatrical glint in his eye. "Or we could make an entrance that's a little less terrestrial." Aurora's heart started beating faster. She knew what he was suggesting. Maxwell owned a fleet of private aircraft through a subsidiary of his company, Lancaster Aerospace. To him, a jet was like a car. "You want to fly to his wedding?" she breathed. "The manor has a heliport, but it's small, barely fit for a Bell 429, Maxwell mused, already scrolling on his phone. "However, there's a private airfield less than 10 miles away. Ample runway for the G700. We could be there wheels down in under 20 minutes from Teterboro." The Gulfstream G700, Maxwell's newest acquisition, a flying masterpiece of engineering and luxury that he often called his sky office. The thought was so audacious, so utterly beyond the realm of anything Declan could possibly conceive of, that Aurora laughed, a real deep laugh that broke the tension in her chest. He would have a complete and total meltdown, she said, the image flashing in her mind. "That's a potential side effect," Maxwell said, with a straight face. "But that's not the point. The point, Aurora, is for you to walk into that place, not as Declan Peterson's sad ex-wife, but as Aurora Monroe, the woman you are today. Successful, happy, and with a man who sees you as a supernova, not an anchor. It's not about revenge. It's about closure, on your terms." His words sliced through her remaining hesitation. He was right. This wasn't about being petty. It was about reclaiming her own story. It was about showing up for herself, proving to the one person who mattered her that the ghosts of the past had no power. "Okay," she said the word, feeling momentous. "Let's do it." The next 10 days were a whirlwind of focused preparation. It felt less like planning a party crash and more like a military operation, with Maxwell as the general and Aurora as the commander on the ground. First, the dress. Aurora knew it couldn't be just any dress. It had to be a statement. She didn't want a revenge dress in the classic sense, not something overtly sexy or attention-seeking. She needed something that spoke of power, elegance, and untouchable grace. She called in a favor with a designer friend in Milan, a woman whose couture gowns were usually reserved for red carpets and royalty. She explained the situation vaguely at first. "I have an event. I need to make an impression." What kind of impression, the designer Isabella had asked over a video call. "Like I own the world, but I'm too busy to be bothered with the paperwork," Aurora replied. Isabella had cackled with delight. "Say no more, my darling. I have the perfect creation." 3 days later, a custom-fitted gown arrived by courier. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with architectural precision, a high neckline, long sleeves, and a column silhouette that draped over her body like liquid moonlight. The only embellishment was a cascade of tiny diamond-like crystals scattered across one shoulder, as if she had brushed against a nebula. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. Next, Maxwell handled the logistics. He arranged for the jet, the pilots, and a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom to be waiting at the private airfield near Blackwood Manor. "Subtlety in motion," he called it. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Aurora asked him one evening as they sat on her balcony sharing a bottle of wine. A sliver of doubt had crept in. "It's your time, your resources. It's my baggage." Maxwell took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Let me tell you something about my world, Aurora. It's filled with people who want something from me. My money, my connections, my name. It's a constant transaction. With you, it's different. You want my time. You want my heart. You let me into your world, your baggage included. Helping you close this chapter isn't a chore. It's a privilege. Besides," he added with a wink, "I've always wanted to see a narcissist's face when his carefully constructed reality implodes. I'll bring popcorn." His unwavering support was her armor. With him by her side, she felt invincible. The day before the wedding, a package arrived for her. It was a small, velvet box from Maxwell. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a necklace. It was a single, impossibly large, pear-cut sapphire suspended from a delicate platinum chain. It was the exact shade of her dress. Her breath caught. It was a museum-quality piece. "Maxwell, this is too much." He called her the moment he knew she'd received it. "It's not too much," he said, his voice warm. "It's a reminder. That man gave you costume jewelry and empty promises. I just wanted you to wear a piece of the sky." On the morning of October the 12th, Aurora woke up, not with the familiar dread, but with a strange electric calm. There was no sadness, no painful nostalgia. It was just a date. A day for a new memory to be forged. She spent the morning at her office, signing off on the Dubai project drafts. Her focus was sharp, her mind clear. She was Aurora Monroe, CEO of a thriving company. Declan Peterson was a footnote from a previous chapter. By late afternoon, the transformation began. A hair and makeup artist recommended by Isabella worked silently and efficiently. Her hair was swept up into a sleek, intricate chignon. Her makeup was understated but striking, emphasizing her eyes, making them look like polished obsidian. When she finally slipped into the midnight blue gown, she hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. This was not the girl who had married Declan Peterson. This was not the woman who had crumbled when he left. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in fire. Maxwell arrived looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over her. Aurora, he breathed, his voice filled with genuine awe. You are transcendent. He held out his hand, and as she took it, he fastened the sapphire necklace around her neck. The cool weight of it against her skin was a final click of a lock, sealing her resolve. Ready to go? He asked. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze in the mirror. Ready. The flight to Teterboro was silent and swift. As they boarded the Gulf Stream, the sheer scale of the moment hit her. The cabin was larger than her first apartment, all cream leather and polished mahogany. The flight attendant offered them champagne. As the jet engines spooled up with a powerful rising whine, Aurora looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She thought of Declan down on the ground, probably adjusting his tie, basking in the adoration of his guests, completely oblivious. He thought he was the ship meant for the open sea. He had no idea a hurricane was coming. Blackwood Manor was exactly as Aurora had pictured it, a sprawling Tudor-style estate that tried very hard to project an air of old-world aristocracy. Manicured lawns, ivy-covered stone walls, and a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. As the Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently up the drive, Aurora could see the main house ablaze with light, the cheerful sounds of a string quartet drifting through the crisp autumn air. Guests in their finest attire mingled on the flagstone patio, champagne flutes in hand. It was a scene of carefully curated elegance, tasteful, expensive, and utterly predictable. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Just as the sun began to set, Maxwell had timed their arrival for 6:15 p.m., perfectly positioned to intercept the post-ceremony, pre-reception cocktail hour. It was the moment of maximum social visibility. Their approach, however, had begun 10 minutes earlier. The first sign that something was amiss in the world of Blackwood Manor was a sound. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It wasn't the familiar thwump-thwump of a helicopter, but a deeper, more powerful roar that seemed to come from the sky itself. The string quartet faltered mid-Mozart. Guests paused their conversations, tilting their heads, their brows furrowed in confusion. The sound grew swelling from a hum to a full-throated roar that rattled the antique window panes and vibrated through the soles of their expensive shoes. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated power. Heads turned, eyes scanning the darkening sky. And then they saw it. Banking gracefully over the Hudson River Valley, its landing lights cutting through the twilight, was the sleek, unmistakable shape of a Gulfstream G700. It was impossibly large, impossibly close. It flew with a majestic, predatory grace, its silver fuselage catching the last rays of the setting sun. It was so out of context for this quiet, bucolic setting that it felt like a scene from a movie. The jet didn't land at the manor, of course. It continued its elegant descent towards the private airfield a few miles away, its thunderous passage a herald of something to come. The whispers started immediately. What on earth was that? Did you see the size of it? Whose jet is that? Does someone here know the president? Inside the main hall, Declan Peterson was at the peak of his glory. He had just exchanged vows with Sophie Miller. He was now officially connected to one of New York's wealthiest families. His financial troubles were a thing of the past. He stood with his new wife, his hand possessively on the small of her back, accepting congratulations. His mother, Margaret Peterson, a woman with a perpetually pinched face and disapproving eyes, hovered nearby, beaming with pride for the first time in years. Such a wonderful ceremony, Declan, a guest gushed, and Sophie, You look radiant." Declan's smile was wide and practiced. "Thank you. We're just so thrilled to start our life together. It's a new beginning, a real ascent." He loved that word, ascent. It was then that the low growl of a high-performance engine replaced the fading roar of the jet. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, black as a starless night, pulled to a stop at the manor's grand entrance. It was a vehicle that commanded attention, not through noise, but through its sheer imposing presence. A valet, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and panic, scrambled to open the passenger door. The first thing the guests on the patio saw was a leg, long, elegant, clad in a sheer stocking, and ending in a stiletto that looked like it was carved from obsidian. Then Aurora Monroe emerged. A collective, hushed intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the patio. She rose from the car, not like a person, but like an event. The midnight blue gown flowed around her, the crystals on her shoulder glittering like a captured constellation. The sapphire at her throat was a point of deep, cold fire. Her hair was a sculpted masterpiece, her face serene and unreadable. She didn't look angry or vengeful. She looked like she was bored with gods. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the stunned crowd with a look of cool, mild appraisal. Then Maxwell stepped out from the other side. If Aurora was the queen of the night, he was her king. The Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like a second skin. He radiated an aura of quiet, unassailable confidence. He wasn't handsome in the flashy, desperate way Declan was. He was handsome in the way a mountain is handsome, solid, timeless, and powerful. He walked to Aurora's side and offered her his arm, his movements economical and precise. Together, they looked less like wedding guests and more like they had arrived to purchase the entire estate as a weekend getaway. The whispers on the patio turned into frantic, urgent murmurs. "Is that Aurora, Declan's ex-wife? My God, I didn't even recognize her. Who is that with her? He looks important. That dress, that necklace must have cost more than the wedding." Declan had just raised a glass of champagne to his lips when he saw the commotion at the door. He turned, a slight annoyance on his face, expecting a late-arriving cousin. His eyes fell on the couple framed in the grand entryway. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask. His jaw went slack. It was a total system failure. His mind simply could not process the data it was receiving. Aurora, that was Aurora, the comfortable, mousy anchor of a woman he had so righteously discarded. And who the hell was the man with her who looked like he could buy and sell everyone in the room? Before his first drink was finished, Sophie, his new bride, followed his gaze. "Declan, darling, what is it?" Her eyes landed on Aurora. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then a gathering storm of feminine indignation. "What is she doing here?" Aurora and Maxwell began to move, gliding through the parted sea of guests with an unhurried grace. They weren't crashing. They were gracing the event with their presence. Aurora's eyes finally found Declan's across the crowded room. She gave him a small, polite smile, a smile one might give to a vaguely familiar waiter. They reached the shell-shocked groom, the broken glass crunching under Maxwell's impeccable shoes. Ignoring the furious glare of the bride and the horrified gasp of her new mother-in-law, Aurora stopped directly in front of her ex-husband. She tilted her head, her expression one of pleasant curiosity. "Declan," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "What a lovely party! You should have told me you were having one." The silence that followed Aurora's words was thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic internal calculations happening behind Declan's eyes. He looked from Aurora's impossibly serene face to Maxwell's cool, observant gaze, and then back to the shattered champagne flute at his feet. It was a perfect metaphor for his state of mind. His first instinct was aggression, the cornered animal's response. "Aurora, what the hell are you doing here? You weren't invited." His voice was louder than he intended, a raw, panicked edge to it. Aurora raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, I must have been mistaken." She feigned a look at the invitation she wasn't holding. "My apologies. We were in the neighborhood and saw the lights. We can certainly leave if we're intruding." It was a masterful stroke. She was offering him an out, a way to de-escalate, but it was an out that required him to publicly ask her to leave her who looked like a goddess, accompanied by a man who radiated influence. To do so would make him look petty and insecure. Maxwell, who hadn't said a word, simply watched Declan, his expression unreadable, but his presence immense. He was a silent checkmate on the board. Sophie, the bride, had no such compunctions. "I think you should," she hissed, stepping forward. Her white dress was a stark contrast to Aurora's dark silk. "This is my wedding day. You have no right to be here." Aurora finally turned her gaze to Sophie, and for the first time, a flicker of something not pity, but perhaps a detached empathy, entered her eyes. "Sophie, isn't it congratulations? He's all yours." The words were simple, but the delivery was devastating. She said it with the weary magnanimity of someone giving away a used piece of furniture. The insult was so subtle, so elegantly delivered, that Sophie was left momentarily speechless, unsure of how to even process it. Before Declan could muster a coherent response, his mother, Margaret Peterson, swooped in. Margaret had spent years perfecting her particular brand of condescending disapproval, and she had always directed the full force of it at Aurora. "Aurora, I knew you had no class, but this is a new low." Margaret spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "To show up here trying to ruin your ex-husband's happiness, it's pathetic." This was the moment Aurora had dreaded, the confrontation with the woman who had made her feel inadequate for a decade. But the old fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. "Hello, Margaret." Aurora said, her tone even and cool. "You look well." Anger is clearly a preservative. She glanced at Maxwell. "Darling, this is Margaret Peterson, Declan's mother. She was instrumental in the success of our marriage." Maxwell extended a hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson." Maxwell Lancaster. The name landed in the charged atmosphere like a dropped anvil. Lancaster, as in Lancaster Aerospace, as in Lancaster Innovations, as in one of the 10 richest self-made men under 40 in the world. Even Margaret, in her bubble of suburban snobbery, knew that name. Her jaw, which had been set in a line of righteous fury, went slack. Her eyes widened, flicking from Maxwell's hand to his face, and then to Aurora, who was now linked with him. The equation did not compute. Margaret's hand, which had been clenched at her side, weakly rose and shook Maxwell's. Mr. Lancaster, I don't understand." "Aurora and I are together," Maxwell stated simply, leaving no room for doubt. He then turned his gaze back to Declan. "Peterson, we don't want to cause a scene. We were simply passing by. Perhaps my fiancé and I could have a celebratory drink with the happy couple and be on our way, fiancé." The word detonated in the center of the room. Aurora felt Maxwell squeeze her arm gently. They had discussed this. It was the final, unassailable piece of the narrative. She wasn't just dating a billionaire. She was marrying him. The sapphire around her neck wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. Declan stared his face, a kaleidoscope of shock, jealousy, and pure, unadulterated rage. Fiancé, the woman he had cast off as dead weight, was engaged to Maxwell Lancaster. It was a cosmic injustice. It defied the laws of the universe as he understood them, a universe that was supposed to revolve around him. The guests, who had been trying their best to pretend they weren't listening, were now abuzz with the revelation. The story was rewriting itself in real time. This wasn't a pathetic ex trying to spoil a wedding. This was a phoenix, risen from ashes Declan didn't even know he'd created, arriving with a dragon in tow. Trapped Declan had no choice but to play the gracious host. Of course, he choked out, forcing a smile that was more of a grimace. Let's all have a drink." He led them towards a small private study off the main hall, away from the prying eyes of the guests. The four of them, a groom in turmoil, a furious bride, a serene ex-wife, and her billionaire fiancé, entered the room. The air was thick with unspoken history and imminent conflict. Declan poured himself a large scotch and downed half of it in one gulp. He finally found his voice, a low accusatory growl directed at Aurora. "This is a game to you, isn't it? Showing up like this with him." He gestured dismissively at Maxwell. "To rub my face in it." "Your face?" Aurora asked, genuinely curious. "Declan, why would you assume my life still revolves around you? I came here tonight to close a door. You chose to have your wedding on October 12th. You must have known I'd see the invitation. Did you expect me to sit at home and cry? Is that the role you assigned me? I expected you to have some decency," he shot back. "And was it decent to tell me I was an anchor?" she replied, her voice dropping, losing its public coolness and taking on a sharper, more personal edge. "Was it decent to dismantle my self-worth so you could walk away guilt-free? I spent years believing you, Declan. Believing I was the reason you weren't soaring." It was the truth he insisted, his desperation making him reckless. "Look at you now. You only managed this." He waved a hand at her dress, her necklace, "because you latched onto someone richer. It's the same thing. You're just a more expensive anchor now." It was a fatal mistake. The insult was so crude, so revealing of his own transactional worldview that it hung in the air, ugly and pathetic. Before Aurora could even respond, Maxwell stepped forward slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Mr. Peterson Maxwell," began his voice, a quiet, lethal calm. "You seem to be under a few misapprehensions. When I met Aurora, she was already the CEO of a multi-million-dollar design firm that she built from the ground up with her own talent and grit. She had already secured the Dubai contracts that I assure you are worth more than this entire estate. I am not the source of her success. I am merely the man lucky enough to be by her side. You, on the other hand..." Maxwell paused, letting the silence stretch. He gave Declan a slow, deliberate, head-to-toe look of appraisal, the kind one gives to a faulty piece of equipment. "I've seen your file," Maxwell continued, his voice dropping even lower. "When Aurora mentioned your name, my security team did a routine background check. It's standard procedure for anyone who enters our lives. The debt from your failed crypto ventures, the margin calls you barely met by borrowing against your parents' retirement fund. Your ascent in finance seems to have been more of a free fall." Declan's face went from pale to ashen. He looked like he'd been physically struck. "You have no right. Don't talk to me about rights." Maxwell cut him off, the steel in his voice, now unmistakable. "You left a woman like Aurora and you tried to break her spirit on the way out. Now you stand here in a suit probably paid for by your father-in-law, in a venue paid for by your father-in-law, about to accept a job you didn't earn from your father-in-law, and you have the audacity to call her an anchor. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot. Sophie, who had been watching with righteous anger, now had a flicker of confusion and doubt in her eyes. She looked at Declan, then at Maxwell, then back at Declan, searching his face for a denial. She found none. She only saw the panicked, guilty sweat beading on his forehead. The first crack in the facade of her perfect king had appeared, and it was starting to spread. The silence in the study was no longer just tense. It was suffocating. Maxwell's words hung in the air, each one a damning indictment that stripped away Declan's carefully constructed persona. Declan stood exposed not as a titan of industry, but as a desperate man in a rented suit. Sophie was the first to break the silence. Her voice was small, uncertain, a stark contrast to her earlier fury. "Declan, what is he talking about? What debt?" Declan rounded on her, his panic curdling into desperate anger. "He's lying. Sophie, can't you see what this is? She's brought him here to ruin our day, to plant these lies." But his denial was weak, his eyes shifty. He couldn't meet her gaze. He couldn't meet anyone's. Aurora watched him, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. The anger she had held on to for so long was dissolving, replaced by a cold, clear pity. He wasn't the formidable man who had crushed her spirit. He was just a boy in a man's body, terrified of being found out. "It's not a lie, is it, Declan?" she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I remember the late nights, the frantic phone calls you tried to hide. I remember you selling off the stocks my grandfather left me, telling me it was for a guaranteed investment. I just never put it all together. I believed you when you said it was my fault, that my lack of vision was stressing you out." She took a step closer, her voice remaining low and steady, a stark contrast to his unraveling composure. "The story you told me about me being an anchor, that was never the truth. The truth is your ship was already sinking, wasn't it? You weren't cutting an anchor. You were jumping onto the nearest lifeboat." She glanced at Sophie, whose hand had flown to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The lifeboat had a name. "No," Declan snarled, cornered. He turned back to Aurora, his face contorted with a venomous resentment. "You want to talk about the truth? You were never satisfied. You were always pushing your little design business, your little projects. You should have been supporting me, my vision. If you had just been the wife I needed, none of this would have happened." It was his last, desperate gambit, blame the victim. But the words, once so powerful, were now hollow and pathetic. Maxwell let out a short, mirthless laugh. "The wife you needed? You mean the financier you didn't have? Mrs. Peterson," he said, turning his attention briefly to Margaret, who was frozen by the door, her face a mask of disbelief. "You must be proud." But the final devastating blow didn't come from Maxwell or Aurora. It came from Sophie. Her initial shock had hardened into a cold, terrifying clarity. The little inconsistencies she had overlooked, the vague answers Declan gave about his business, his eagerness to have her father handle all their finances, it all clicked into place. The man she had just married wasn't a king building an empire. He was a refugee seeking asylum from his own failures. "My father," Sophie said, her voice trembling but clear. "The vice president position at his firm. The one he offered you as a wedding gift. Was that part of the deal, Declan?" Declan's face crumpled. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Sophie, baby, listen to me. It wasn't like that. I love you. I fell in love with you and your father just... He saw my potential. He wanted to help." "Help you?" Sophie's voice rose, laced with hysteria. "Help you by paying off your debts? Was that it was I, the bailout package? Was our marriage a business transaction?" "No, of course not," he pleaded, reaching for her. She recoiled as if his touch were toxic. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "That jet that flew over here, all those whispers from the guests, they were all looking at me, pitying me, the stupid rich girl who bought herself a husband." The raw, ugly truth of her words hung in the air. Declan had no response. His silence was a confession. This was the moment Aurora had unknowingly been waiting for. Not a moment of revenge, but of complete and utter vindication. It wasn't about her being better off. It was about the fundamental lie of their breakup being exposed. She hadn't failed him. He had failed himself, and he had used her as a scapegoat. With a quiet grace, she turned to leave. Her purpose there was finished. The door was not just closed, it was sealed, the lock turned, the key dissolved. As she reached the door, she paused beside the sobbing bride. For a moment, she saw not the snooty socialite, but another woman who had been deceived by Declan's charm. On impulse, she spoke, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a quiet finality. "For what it's worth," Aurora said, "I don't think you're stupid. I think you just believed him. I did too, for a very long time." Sophie looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting Aurora's. In that moment, there was a flash of understanding between two women who had occupied the same space in a man's dishonest world. Then Aurora and Maxwell were gone, stepping out of the suffocating study and back into the main hall. The string quartet had resumed, playing a brave but futile attempt to restore normalcy. But the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The guests fell silent again as Aurora and Maxwell passed their expressions, a mixture of awe, pity, and frantic excitement. They were witnesses to a legend in the making. They didn't look back as they exited the manor. They didn't need to hear the shouting that erupted from the study. They didn't need to see Sophie rip the veil from her hair, or see Declan's mother finally comprehending the monumental fraud her son had perpetrated. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from Blackwood Manor, Aurora looked at its reflection in the side mirror. A house of lies, ablaze with light, beginning to crumble from the inside out. She felt no joy, no schadenfreude. She just felt light. The anchor wasn't him. It had been the story he'd made her believe, and now she was free of it. The ride back to the private airfield was silent, but it was a comfortable, shared silence. Aurora leaned her head against the plush leather of the Rolls-Royce, the lights of passing cars painting fleeting patterns across Maxwell's stoic profile. The adrenaline was beginning to subside, leaving in its wake a profound and bone-deep sense of peace. The G700 was waiting for them on the tarmac, a beacon of otherworldly power in the quiet darkness of the countryside. As they ascended the stairs and the cabin door sealed shut, with a soft hiss, it felt like they were leaving the entire messy terrestrial world behind. Once airborne, the lights of the Hudson Valley spread out below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Aurora could just make out a cluster of lights that was Blackwood Manor, a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast darkness. "Are you okay?" Maxwell asked, his hand covering hers. "I am," she said, and she was surprised by the depth of her own sincerity. "I'm better than okay. For 2 years, I've been carrying this weight, this narrative that I was less than, that I wasn't enough. I thought seeing him again would hurt. I thought seeing him happy would break me. She looked out the window at the shrinking lights below. But he wasn't happy, he was terrified. And I wasn't broken. I was free. She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but they were not tears of sadness. Thank you, Maxwell. Not for the jet, or the dress, or the necklace. Thank you for giving me the support to go back there and find myself again. He brought her hand to his lips. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Aurora. I just cleared the runway. They didn't talk about Declan for the rest of the flight. They talked about the future. They planned a trip to Kyoto to see the cherry blossoms in the spring. He told her about a new philanthropic foundation he was starting for STEM education for girls, and her eyes lit up as she immediately started sketching ideas for the foundation's headquarters on a cocktail napkin. They were two people building something real, looking forward, not back. The aftermath of their visit to Blackwood Manor became the stuff of legend in New York society circles. The story pieced together from the whispers of guests and the loud, furious arguments that followed their departure spread like wildfire. The wedding, for all intents and purposes, ended the moment Aurora and Maxwell left. Sophie Miller, in a spectacular display of wrath, had called her father from the study. The conversation was reportedly short and brutally effective. The vice president position was rescinded. The financial safety net was yanked away. The marriage, not even 3 hours old, was over. Sophie left with her parents that night, leaving a humiliated Declan to face his stunned guests and his aghast mother alone in the monument to his failed ambitions. The annulment was swift and merciless. A few weeks later, Aurora saw a small piece in a business gossip column. Declan Peterson had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His parents had sold their home to cover the debts he had accrued against it. He had fallen from a height that had only ever existed in his own imagination. Aurora felt nothing. It was like reading about a stranger. One crisp December evening, she and Maxwell were walking through Central Park. Snow had just begun to fall, dusting the trees and muffling the sounds of the city. They stopped on the Bow Bridge, the same spot where Declan had proposed to her a lifetime ago. She had once avoided this place, this ghost-filled landmark of her past. But tonight, standing here with Maxwell's arm wrapped around her, the cold air on her cheeks, it was just a bridge. A beautiful bridge in a beautiful city. You know, she said, looking at the soft flakes landing on his coat. He proposed to me here. Maxwell looked at her, his expression gentle. Does it bother you to be here? She shook her head, a genuine smile on her face. No, it's just a memory, and it's not the most important one I have of this place anymore. He smiled back, pulling her closer. Good, because I was hoping to make a new one. And there, on the same spot where her old life had been promised, Maxwell Lancaster got down on one knee in the falling snow and asked Aurora Monroe to be his wife. This time, there were no illusions, no empires, no grand ambitions. There was just a man and a woman grounded in truth, love, and a respect so deep it was the foundation of their world. She said yes, of course. Her answer was as quiet and sure as the falling snow, a promise of a future that wasn't about ascending, but about being truly, deeply, and unshakably home. Aurora's story isn't just about a dramatic wedding crash. It's about rewriting your own narrative. It's about realizing that the people who try to define you are often just projecting their own failures and insecurities. She didn't need a billionaire or a private jet to be powerful. She already was. The grand entrance was just her finally choosing to see herself the way the world was about to. Her real victory wasn't Declan's downfall but her own liberation from a story that was never truly hers. What did you think of Aurora's ultimate power move? Have you ever had a moment where you had to take back your own story from someone else? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp as a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures, his casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe two, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible." "Too bad," Chloe countered. "Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him." Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. "You will die alone." Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay, I'll go." Chloe's smile was triumphant. "That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes." The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. "Stop hiding behind the ficus," Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. "You look like a goddess. Own it." They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian, he's so classy, she's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide." Chloe looked horrified. "Emma, you never told me it was that direct." "I was ashamed," Emma admitted. "And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project." Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. "Do you have proof?" he asked quietly. "Drafts, notes, emails." Emma's heart leaped. "Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything." Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. "Then we have a new plan," he said. "We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about." He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. "He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it." The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy. Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process. Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, "To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality." A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, "The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality." A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the Architect of You was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.